St. Paul was once Saul, a name bestowed upon him in memory of the first king of the Jewish nation. He was born to strict Hebrew parents at Tarsus, a city in Cilicia which at the time was a province of the Roman Empire. The language of his youth was Greek. But due to his Hebrew ethnic background, he was sent to study the Jewish law in Jerusalem at a young age. It is believed he mastered the language and thoroughly understood the monotheistic concept of theology, the one and only God. His status therefore started from a young Jew, a very good student, a rabbi, a Pharisee, and most probably a member of the Sanhedrin. It was during this time Saul encountered the new sectarian movement of Christians among the Jews. Saul reacted negatively to this new movement, most probably because the proclaiming of Jesus as the Christ and Lord was blasphemous to the only one God commission that the Jews and Paul believed in. As a devout Jew, a Pharisee who believed they best serve God by strictly obeying the laws of the Old Testament, as well as their rules and traditions and their teachings, his disapproval and dislike of this new Christian movement culminated in his aggressive move to persecute them. History recorded, he did that to the Christians until the Spirit of the resurrecting Christ confronted him at Damascus, which was his conversion experience. It is at this point Saul the rabbi ceased to believe in their Jewish traditions, which stated God dealt with his people through the laws, rules, and regulations. Instead, Paul became the apostles who believed in the saving act of God through Jesus Christ. So he worked hard and diligently with the Christians to preach the good news among the Jews. But this was met with very strong resistance by the Jews. Paul therefore made the decision it was his call to be the missionary to the Gentiles, as he later regarded up to now as the apostles to the Gentiles. So he took his missionary journeys to Asia Minor, to Macedonia, and to Greece. He went to northern Greece first, where he taught and preached at Thessalonica and Philippi. But Corinth was a significant city at the time because it was a major port to both east and west of Greece. It had a port on its shore to the west on the Adriatic Sea, where it has access to Rome and Europe. And to the east, it has port on Aegean Sea, which has access to Ephesus, Antioch, and to Jerusalem. So to the Romans, the commercial significance of Corinth was very important to the economy. But to Paul, the high population of travelers through Corinth was an ideal place to preach the good news. So on his way to Corinth, he had to stop at Athens. Athens is known during Paul's time as a university city. It was the seat of art, of treasures. It was the center of the well-learned. It was the community proud of its philosophers, the likes of Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and the rest. When Paul arrived at Athens, he went about his usual approach to his ministry among any new community he landed on. He went to the synagogue. He figured there would always be some Jews there. He went to the marketplace. There would always be a crowd there. But while he was in the synagogue, he was questioned by the Jews about his authority to talk about the laws of the Old Testament, to which Paul responded, "Are you Hebrew? So am I. Are you Israelites? So am I. Are you descendants of Abraham? So am I. And for your information, I was circumcised on the 8th day. I'm a member of the tribe of Benjamin. As far as the law is concerned, I am a Pharisee." And then he continued to preach God's saving act through Jesus Christ. To some people, the mention of Jesus and the resurrection sounded like the names of God and Goddess. To some, they felt Paul was trying to introduce new object to worship. To the ears of the pagans listeners, they thought Paul was only a seed picker, an Athenian slang applied to anyone who loafed about the marketplace, picking up odds and ends. Paul, while touring the city, was probably surprisingly disappointed, for he saw so many statues of different gods, so many temples to different gods, so many sanctuaries to different gods. The god of war, the god of hell, the god of the wind, the god of love, the god of wealth, and the god of the sun. As Ottomanians put it, the apostles witnessed a forest of statues and a jungle of temples and sanctuaries. I believe it is safe to say the red flag of idol worship went up in Paul's mind. In the social structure of Athens at the time, there was a council of Areopagus which had the authority over all matters pertaining to the religious life of the city. When members of the crowd brought their query to the council concerning what they thought as strange teaching by Paul, the council summoned the apostles to appear in front of them, but not necessarily to try him on any wrongdoing. Rather, the council were trying to satisfy their own curiosity in Paul's new teachings. What they heard was one of the most famous speeches recorded in the New Testament. So Paul, standing in the middle of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the object of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all men life and breath and everything. And he made from one every nation of men to live on all face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their habitation, that they should seek God, in the hope that they might feel after him and find him. Yet he is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your poets have said, for we are indeed his offsprings. Being then God's offsprings, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, a representation by the art and imagination of man. The time of ignorance God overlooked. But now he commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all men by raising him from the dead. After Paul's speech, a number of people were converted. It is important to note that even one member of the Council of Areopagus, Dionysius, was converted right there, and a woman by the name of Damaris. This success at Athens must have boosted the confidence and joy of the apostle to keep on doing his preaching. And then he left Athens and went to Corinth. When the apostles arrived to Corinth, he learned the same evidence of polytheism he witnessed at Athens. To Paul, idol worship was alive and well in Corinth. There were several sanctuaries and temples, to Heracles, Poseidon, to Apollo, to Hermes, Venus and Fortuna, the Pantheon, to Asclepius. But the temple which bothered Paul the most was that of Aphrodite. This was the goddess of prostitution. The Greek geographer by the name of Strabo of Amasia left behind his impression of Corinth at the time. He said Corinth was wealthy because of its commerce generated by its two harbors. More revenues from the crowd who celebrated the Isthmian Games, later known as Olympic Games. But the sanctuary of Aphrodite was so wealthy that it possessed as slaves of the temple more than 1,000 employees who were dedicated to the goddess both by men and women. And so by reason of them, the city was thronged and enriched, for the sailors spent their money easily. And on that account, the proverb says, "Not for every man is a voyage to Corinth." I had a chance to set foot in the old city of Corinth. Our historian tour guide took us to the marketplace and pointed to where Paul stood and challenged the crowd who were willing to listen to his message. I took the chance to stand at the very spot supposedly Paul stood at the marketplace. I could see Paul had a clear view of the people who happened to be standing at the ground floor while he was at the second level. But 20 or 25 meters in front of Paul, behind the market walls, lay the ruins of the temple to Apollos. But over his left shoulder, about 2.5 miles away at 500 meters high, sits the temple to Aphrodite. I have a feeling when Paul addressed the idol worship, he pointed to the temple to Apollos being behind the crowd. And when he addressed the prostitution issue, he told the crowd to look over his shoulder in reference to the temple to Aphrodite. So he had the chance to address both issues at one time. As the apostle did at other cities when he first arrived, he went to synagogue. Again, while preaching there, the Jews questioned his authority to the law, to which he told them, "I am Hebrew, born of Hebrew." When he taught at public places in Corinth, people questioned his right to teach there, to which he pointed to them, he is a Roman citizen. But when both Jews and Gentiles questioned his knowledge of the Old Testament, he quoted from the Greek version called the Septuagint, so that they could converse in exchange in the local language. But the Jews could not accept the Jesus the Christ part of the apostles' teaching, so they were successful in disallowing him from the synagogues. But one of the converts, named Titius Justus, opened his house for the apostle to preach to those who received his message. Ironically, Justus' house was very close to the synagogue, and it became the first church in Corinth. So before long, even the ruler to the synagogue, Crispus, was converted. And following him was the treasurer to the city. Erastus was also converted. The membership of the new congregation, both Jews and Gentiles, increased. But Paul did not just capture the people at the church. By trade, he was a tent maker. When he was not preaching or teaching, he developed a warm and mutual relationship with the locals who shared the same craft and those who were willing to learn the trade. They must have earned some incomes by building tents to accommodate the crowd that came to the infamous game. I have a feeling things were going steady and well for the apostles and the new church in Corinth. He built that church in Corinth for 1.5 years before he left for Ephesus on his way back to Antioch and Jerusalem. For about 2 years since he was in Ephesus, travelers from Corinth brought the news that the church was in trouble. More people brought news of dissension among the membership. They were taking sides. They had questions for clarification on some issues concerning the Lord's Supper, the food offered to idols but later bought by Christians. Some people decided to be followers of Apollos or of Peter or of Paul. Question about those who claim to have spiritual gifts by speaking in tongues. And there was always the immoral questions of prostitution. And there was a case of a man who ended up marrying his widowed stepmother. So that is the very purpose of why the apostle wrote his first letter to the church at Corinth. Our scripture today is part of the apostle's effort to address the dissension among the members of the church at Corinth. Chapter 1 to chapter 4 is the apostle's effort to call for unity. Our text today, Paul talked specifically about working together for God. Some of you say you follow me, and others claim to follow Apollos. We are just servants who help you to have faith. But it was the Lord who made it all happen. I planted the seed, Apollo watered them, but God made them grow. Paul made it clear, Apollo and I work together for God. Yes, he was trying to address every single issue which caused the indifference or the fragmentations of the church in Corinth. But 3 days from today will be the celebration of independence on the 4th of July. I wonder what Paul would have written to the people of the United States with so many differences in race, in gender, in sexual orientation, in political ideologies, in economical status, academic credentials, the affluent and the homeless. Would he talk about patriotism or freedom or justice or human rights? This being a political year, would he address the Democrats, the Republicans, and the Independents to dissolve all those labels and become again we the people? Would he tap onto the immigration law, which is a controversial issue at the moment? Would he support the health policy which has been debated in Congress and Senate for so long? But before election, would he remind every citizen how the Declaration of Independence came about? Would he talk about the Constitution and redefine the strong element of religious life as was first intended by the Founding Fathers? He probably could. He probably could. But how about us here in First Christian Church in Bloomington? Today, this morning, and every Sunday morning, we proclaim every Sunday morning affirmation of identity. We are disciples of Christ, a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. Is this fragmentation only the recognition of our different biological makeup, our different temperament, our different values, our different cultural upbringing, or our different generations and our different faith formation? Or is this fragmentation become the tension among ourselves when we use the different aspects of ourselves to create indifferences and indecencies towards each other? Would he tell us how to put together a budget and how to reconcile if there is any difference and disagreement? Will he tell us exactly what kind of material works for us in our educational program? Would he help us to understand the value of both traditional and contemporary worship? He probably could. From chapter 1 to chapter 12, the apostle tried to provide guidance in how to live the Christian life and how to treat each other. Chapter 12, there is a strong interest in what the spiritual gift ought to be. There was a question, what qualifies a spiritual gift? Who possesses one? Even the notion of which gift is more significant. After Paul pointed out different spiritual gifts, his last word in that chapter say, I want you to desire the best gift, so I will show you a much better way. Then the apostles went into one of the most original, the most popular, the most appealing, the most romanticized, the most sensationalized, and the most profound and convincing statement he ever put together. In chapter 13, he submit to the people of Corinth the best way and no other way to live life. is to love. It is not another speech to the Council of Arabicus. It is not another "I have a dream" speech. It is more powerful and it is more enriching. And I would like to read from the contemporary English version. What if I could speak all languages of humans and of angels? If I did not love others, I will be nothing more than a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. What if I could prophesy and understand all secrets and all knowledge? And what if I had faith that moved mountains? I would be nothing unless I loved others. What if I gave away all that I owned and let myself be burned alive? I will gain nothing unless I loved others. Then I can imagine the apostles say to the people in Corinth, to the citizens of the United States, and to the membership of the congregation of the First Christian Church in Bloomington, know this and know it well. Love is kind and patient, never jealous, boastful, proud, or rude. Love isn't selfish or quick-tempered. It doesn't keep a record of wrong that others do. Love rejoices in the truth, but not in evil. Love is always supportive, loyal, hopeful, and trusting. Love never fails. Some versions say love never ends. The literal Greek translation of this piece of scripture states, love never falls, or love never falls short. Never fall short, never fail, never ends implies a very strong notion of wholeness and completeness. As the apostles re-emphasize in the verse 13, for now there are faith, hope, and love, but of these three the greatest is love. What did he really mean by that? Clarence Tucker Gregg, one of the theologians, suggested the apostles knew the time is coming when faith will be replaced by knowledge and when hope will find its realization. But in the new age, love will not be superseded, for God is love. And that is why love never ends. There were people in Paul's time who said they did not want to hear from the apostles about the Jesus religions. Rather, they want to hear what Jesus said. It's either the people forgot or they did not know what Jesus said. When Jesus was questioned by the crowd whether he came to abolish or to fulfill the law, Jesus said, I come to fulfill. And may I add to that, Jesus could say, upon this love I base my ministry. At the core of every healing deed I give is love. At the center of every miracle I perform is love. At the essence of every teaching I utter is love. And there are some people, even in these days, still wonder what Jesus would have said to different situations of life. To them, I want to remind them one of the longest accounts of what Jesus said. He said it to his disciples. He told the crowd, to the church at Corinth, to the early church, and even to us today. At the core of what he says is love one another. At the center of what he says is the love of God. At the essence of what he says is the God of love. The same God of Abraham, of Moses, of Jacob, of Jesus our Lord, of the Apostle Paul. The same God of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. The same God of Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone. The same God of Helen Amber and Bill Crow. And should be your God and my God. No, I will take it back. It must be our God. Let us recall what Jesus said to remind us who we are and whose we are as we sing and pray.